This is Castle 1. Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane line is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here. Lower and faster here.
That's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there. Gaining on the lane line.
We're looking at 10.5, 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah. Copy.
Welcome back, podcast listeners. It's good to have you with us for what we think, anyway, is a pretty special edition of the pod. It's fair to say that this month our guest can legitimately be referred to as an America's Cup legend. Ruthless, outspoken, even a little mischievous. He has a real naughty edge to what has to be one of the most recognisable voices in sailing. You're in for a treat, I promise. Just quickly before we get going, we had a bumper inbox after last month's pod with American Magic skipper Terry Hutchinson. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts and reactions. Part 2, which sees Terry relive that unforgettable capsize, all felt pretty emotional for many of you. So thanks for your messages, and of course again to Terry. A massive thanks to all of you who contributed and left lovely messages on buymeacoffee.com. It's really appreciated, and if we're both honest, after 2 years of beavering away, it's also really heartwarming that you appreciate all the hard work Tim and I put into the pod. So a big fat thank you to all of you for your support. We're going to run with it a little longer. If you haven't done so and want to support us, keeping the podcast ad-free, then it's easy to find. buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast. It's super quick, super easy, and it's greatly appreciated. I hope you're all managing to get out on the water and enjoy your own sailing. I've been head down this month. As many of you know, I'm racing a mixed double-handed offshore campaign with British offshore star Henry Bombay, pushing hard to be race win ready for the Fastnet later in the summer. But the big news, listeners, is that we've just launched a mini-series of short films following our campaign. Beautifully shot, of course, apart from the bits Henry and I do, but we are getting better. Part 1 and Part 2 are already up on the podcast YouTube channel. Please do take a look. Head to Shirley Robertson's Sailing Podcast on YouTube, or take a look at my social media. You can click through from there and let us know what you think. Anyway, enough about me. Our guest this month has won the America's Cup 4 times on the bounce. His tactical prowess is legendary. He's an America's Cup Hall of Famer. Kiwi Brad Butterworth's talent is unquestioned, but he's also a rare species in our sport. He's never afraid to have an opinion and to torment his opposition. To him, it's all part of the game. In this part, we go back and discuss his early days in New Zealand, racing in the Whitbread with Peter Blake. And as you listen to him, you begin to understand not just how Brad got so good, but also how and why the New Zealand nation began to develop into the formidable force it still is in our sport. Brad Butterworth opened the door. He set the standard for all that followed. I hope you enjoy the time I spent with Brad Butterworth.
Peter Blake offered me a job, so I took that because I really wanted to be a sailor, not a sailmaker. And I basically went off and worked for Connor. Lessons learnt from him were big in our success after that. Guys like me, my ears were wide open, I'm trying to understand how the business of yacht racing works as well.
Brad Butterworth, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on the pod. Thanks for coming. And we're here in the Royal New Zealand Squadron. I mean, an impressive club. And just outside the door here of the library, the America's Cup.
Yeah, that's right. It's been quite a lot of time down here lately.
I know you've seen a lot of it, but it's still, it's extraordinary that it's just at the top of the stairs.
Yeah, I know. They, for a little club like this, it's a big deal. I think they probably maybe take it a bit for granted in terms of what the effort goes into to win it. But they, the fact that it's here is, it's a big, very proud thing for Kiwis.
Now, do you listen to podcasts at all, Brad?
No, I tend to not read too much of what the media say or listen.
You live on an island. I mean, I live on an island as well, and obviously commutes on the ferry. I got to recommend a good podcast. Not necessarily ours, but it's a good thing. Makes the time pass quickly. Well, anyway, thank you for making the time. We're here in Auckland, of course. Brad, what's your involvement been at AC36?
Actually, I just got, when the COVID shut everything down, actually, when they fired, there was two guys that were running the event here called Mayo and Calder. And when Dalton fired them, that was the link between Luna Rossa or Prada and the event, because those guys worked for both sides of it. So it just turned into a bit of a mess, really. And so Patrizio Bertelli gave me a call and said, can you open a few doors for me down here? Because I'm getting no response. So that's how it sort of started. And then I've had to fight the odd fight over different competitive issues between the groups, but nothing too exciting.
Would it be fair to say you're the diplomat in this? I mean, what kind of role is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, not many people would call me a diplomat, but anyway, yeah, I've just been sort of in between them, and so it's quite difficult. Different cultures, you've got a strong Italian team, but there's a lot of Italians in there, and just as like if they go to any other country, cultures and rules are different, and so just explaining what it really means, what people say to them, and how they go about things is, often it's perceived as bad, and it's actually not. It's the other way. It's a good thing. So I do a bit of that, really.
A tricky role. We're recording this midway through the actual Cup match, but maybe looking back on the Prada Cup, the Challenger Series here, I mean, what did you make of that? What did you make of the Challenger Series?
It was a bit disappointing, if you ask me, because it was not many teams. So you got 3 boats, and one of them crashes out halfway through the regatta. So you're down to only really 2 teams, And for sure the groups are strong, and they've got good sailors, and good technical side of their teams is strong. They're all pretty strong. But, like guys that are, good foiling sailors, like, Outeridge and Tom Slingsby and stuff like that, there wasn't enough teams for those guys. And so, when you're thinking about the America's Cup, you think about the best. And so you'd want to see a few of those guys being, in the teams, I think. And, lifting more teams would help the whole game completely.
No, I agree, but it has had the wow factor. I mean, the boats, to me, it's just been incredible. I mean, what did you think of the new class, the AC75s? Are you a fan, Brad?
I think I am, really. But, I think the boats are quite efficient. So they go upwind and downwind pretty well. I actually think the races are too short. So 25 minutes, and, they try to make it a stadium deal, and I'm not sold on the format and the way that they do it. I mean, really, I think the Cup could have done without these boats. You could have easily just transitioned with the 50-footers from Bermuda, where the boats were getting quite close, and the racing was, I thought was a bit better. So every time you change, the America's Cup changes, the boat changes. It's a very coarse sort of road that you go down, and some guys get it right and some guys get it wrong. And the boat, one boat's usually, quite dominant. And like, it's taken a long time with COVID. It's taken a long time for these guys to actually sail the boats efficiently and show just, how good they can be. So I think if they had another year, they'd be a lot better off.
It's been incredible, though, even in the few months that we've been here, to see the progression and the sophistication, really, and how they're sailing it and how the boats develop just in a short period of time.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, they go, they're very fast, and the start is, you got one sort of manoeuvre and that's it. And, I'm not sold on the format. The boats, yeah, they look like they certainly look like fun, and they're efficient, but they're not cheap either. And look, I mean, the America's Cup's a game where you have to have a wealthy individual or a country backing you. But that aside, it's more design driven than ever before.
Well, we've plenty of cup chat coming up, Brad, but let's spin the clock back a bit. How did a young Brad Butterworth discover the sport of sailing?
Actually, I was introduced to it by my father. So my father used to sail mullet boats here off Ponsonby Cruising Club, and was building a boat in his backyard when I was growing up. Just a Burt Willicott designed sort of cruiser racer in those days, which wasn't, would be like a vintage boat now. So he sort of introduced me to it, and built me a P class, which was the trainer here, and introduced me to sailing, and so I sort of got into it really from there on in. And over from 9 through to 16, 15, I was sailing that boat, and then left school and worked as a sailmaker apprentice, and did my time as a sailmaker, and then wound up with North Sails. And so I was in the marine industry, as well as sort of got quite excited about the sport of sailing.
The P class, for our listeners, is like it's a big deal here, isn't it? It's the optimist, it's the youth class of New Zealand, or it certainly was. I mean, what was that scene like? Can you remember the people you were sailing with and against?
You're sailing against all the guys that were actually popped out at the end. There was a lot more very good sailors that didn't make it through that transition between you leave the P class and you have to pick another sort of young guy's boat, and it's like a laser, or in those days there's not much to go to, so it was quite difficult. But guys like Russell Coots and Chris Dixon were sailing. They all came through that same mechanism. Murray Jones, David Barnes, all those guys were instrumental in coming through that youth era. So for me, I was very lucky, because of the guys that I sort of grew up sailing against, and I wound up sailing with, because a lot of the teams became professional. And when we became professional, we wound up sort of generating to the same team, and then so quite a special sort of moment, really.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? You end up in the America's Cup with the people you've been hanging around with since you've been 9 years old.
That's right. Yeah, you're going to pinch yourself, really.
Brad, you mentioned that you left school at 16. I mean, why was that? And was it always going to be sailing, or was there a backup plan? Not
really. I just don't think it really. I didn't school, and I didn't really get on that well, so it was difficult. I don't know. Probably just a slow learner. Anyway, it was didn't work out that way, and I was always looking for something like getting into a sport in some shape or form. Getting either into the industry of that sport or into the sport as well. And so growing up in Auckland is sailing everywhere, and you just wind up crewing on keel boats as well as sailing dinghies. And so you're sort of immersed in the whole culture of it. And when I was a kid, we just grew up with it. We'd sail, both days on the weekend, and probably 2 nights during the week. So, we did a lot of sailing.
As you said, you got a job early on at North Sails and with Tom Schnackenberg. I mean, I guess you were in a pretty good place. You were in one of the sport's big spheres of influence of the time. And so in 1983, Australia finally wrestled the America's Cup away from the New York Yacht Club. Can you remember that? And what was the feeling around that at the time?
Well, I was working at North Sales, and so I actually was working for the Australia 2 team for over a year as a sailmaker, and sailing a little bit on the backup boat when they needed somebody and stuff like that. So I was working for Tom Schneckenberg, and so I was very fortunate in those days to, have a guy that smart and that easy to sort of get on with, that you could, I was just learning as much as I possibly could. And when I actually was going to go to Newport for that summer, but Peter Blake offered me a job or a spot as the helmsman of a Admirals Cup boat. And so I took that because I really wanted to be a sailor, not a sailmaker. And so I left that. But when they won, it was sort of, I don't know, a huge moment in the sport of sailing, I think, because people looked at it, especially New Zealand looked at it as if they can do it, why can't we do that, And then it changed everything. And they kept those silly old 12 metres as the boat. So, there's a lot of effort put in behind that. So, New Zealand, through Michael Fay and actually Marcel Faschler, who did put the challenge in, he, changed everything in New Zealand sailing.
Yeah, it seemed at that point, I guess, that it was winnable.
Definitely, it looked like you could, you could dream of winning, that's for sure. To actually win it, we were a bit unfortunate we didn't win it on our first shot at it, but we were just, we just didn't know.
What were you doing sailing-wise to get involved in the cup scene here in Auckland? I mean, why were you kind of recognised as part of that? What were you doing?
I was, what happened here is that a guy named Warwick Brown, who ran Citizen Watches here, sponsored a match racing series. And so in those days, guys like Dick Deaver and actually Rod Davis was just a kid sailing in those with like everyone else. But he was a good match racer. And so all these overseas guys came down here, and we got to sail with them to make up the crews. And when that wasn't happening, we used to sail on the Stuart 34s here, which was a strong local class and had a high caliber of sort of talent sailing in the boats. And so it was quite competitive, to say the least. And so that class was huge. And so you learned to crew work, you had spinnakers and spinnaker poles and you had to match race. And so we used to train a lot. Those boats got a hell of a lot of use. And, it was the sort of it was sort of growing all these, young guys that were trying to get into the sailing scene. And so, that's what I was doing. I was sailing with a bunch of my mates that I still sail with today. And we went match racing.
Good training ground. I mean, did you think then, I'm quite good at this? I mean, when did you kind of realise that you had a knack for it?
Actually, I was steering. So I was, because I came through the classes and you'd sail dinghies. And so steering is one part of it. But I've always considered myself, okay, I can steer a boat well, that's for sure. But at that level, there's some very special guys that I rate, that are amazing helmsmen, Obviously Coots is, right up there, but Ed Baird, Dean Barker, there's really a host of them. Peter Gilmore's another one. You could name 5 or 6 guys in my generation or through my career that are special. And I was never going to get to that level. But I was a lot better at communicating, and tactics was something that I was very interested in from a young age. I was buying books and reading about it and learning. And of course, Tom Whidden was a guy that I, looked up to. And so he was very good for me because he was, he'd explain things, and I've had opportunities to sail with him. and of course we're great mates. And so it was I was lucky in that whole era that I got those opportunities.
So by 1987, New Zealand were in it, weren't they? I mean, how exciting was that time for an up-and-coming Brad Butterworth?
Well, I didn't actually. It was pretty exciting for us. We were doing I got cool. I was sail making here, and I'd actually tried to start my own company with a couple of guys, John Clinton, a guy named Dave Schmidt, and Sobstad. So it was I met Whidden, and we were trying to sort of make a living out of sail making, which was hard. Anyway, sailing wise, so Michael Fay offered me a job in Fremantle, and I had to make a choice. So I basically sold out of the sail making business and spent a year in Fremantle with a lot of the guys that had done the Round the World race online. New Zealand came into that group, and Chris Dixon was one of the helmsmen, and Graham Woodruff was another local, sort of generation ahead of us guys, but he was a pretty colourful character. So that was a whole new professional era that started sort of overnight by Michael Fay and David Richwhite that found the money to do it.
Did it feel like the beginning of something quite big here in New Zealand?
Yeah, it did. It did, because it gained a lot of momentum, and it sort of wound up being, gaining sort of a lot of the trust and the like. It had a feel-good factor here. Sailing was a sport that was, it's not rugby, but it's, everybody's sort of exposed to the sea here, and, boats are something that you can get on and go out on, quite easily, I think. And so people really like sailing, and they liked the way that it sort of happened, and it liked, New Zealand sort of trying to beat off the big guys in a sport that we were, that we liked.
What did you guys learn from that 87 campaign, beaten by Dennis Conner in the Challenger Series final? What do you remember about it all?
Well, once again, the Michael Fay, he put a lot of faith in Bruce Farr and the design side of things. And Bruce Farr did a great job with the actual boat and the rigs, and the whole technical part of the campaign was pretty strong. The sailing side of it, we had coaches, which was Laurent Esquier and Harold Bennett and Roy Dixon, actually. And I think they did a pretty, amazing job for the time. But we were sort of cocooned in the Portuguese club, which was like a walled fortress in Fremantle. And so it was a pretty testosterone-filled group. And in the end, we fell short because we didn't actually improve our sales to the extent, or we had great sales, but they were just too fat for the heavy air when it got stronger. And so Conor had really punted for a long boat, heavy boat with flat sails. And so, I was sort of a little bit, I guess we were super disappointed, but a little bit, I couldn't believe it, this guy who sort of, he liked to drink, and he was happy to enjoy himself any time he liked, and he was probably a little bit outspoken in those days. But one of the, he's in my top 10, that guy, in terms of how well he sails. And so we just started studying him, really. And we were disappointed that we lost, that's for sure. And I think with flatter sails, we could have beaten him. But we were like 2 boat lengths a beat slower than him. And that was enough. He was a good sailor, and he had good guys with him, Peter Eisler. And of course, Whidden was the tactician. They didn't make any mistakes, really.
He studied Dennis Conner. I mean, he could fill this library, couldn't he? He's a complex character. What did you learn from him?
Actually, I got a job from him. I sailed around the world, he gave me a job to sail a boat called Winston, which was a cigarette company that he'd got as a sponsor. And, we were, after 92, Coots and we had sort of formed a bit of a group, a team, and Russell went off and to, study the design side of it, and I basically went off and worked for Connor and actually learned a hell of a lot about the America's Cup and how he views things and the way he goes about things and stuff like that, which is not exactly the way we've done it, but lessons learnt from him were, unbelievably big in our success after that.
Like what?
Oh, just the way he trained, just the way he thought about things. He doesn't really dwell too much on stuff that doesn't matter. He gets on, he realises boat speed's a big deal, and he's just technically, very competent and understands the game of sail racing or yacht racing very, very well, and so he taught me a lot about course management, how do you divide the race course up, when you can take a risk, when you can't take a risk. Those guys, they wrote the book on that.
Well, you weren't just looking at the Cup back then, Brad. In 1989, you were off around the world on Steinlager II with Sir Peter Blake. I mean, how big an adventure, how exciting was that period?
I actually wasn't that keen to go in the beginning because it's offshore and it's a big deal. I mean, I was doing some offshore sailing, I don't think I would have gone with anybody else, because Blake was a bit of a mentor for me. He was we were lucky. There was a bunch of guys like I was good mates of mine, like Kevin Shoebridge was a watch leader and Ross Fields was a lot. So the three of us sort of ran the boat, and Blake was the skipper and in charge, and Mike Coulter did the navigation. And so we had a pretty tight group, and then the crew was all, we had Dean Phipps, and we had a lot of good guys, Graham Fleury, and, we had a lot of very strong individuals, good sailors that were competent. And, Blake looked at it differently, which I think we brought a bit of the America's Cup sort of way of doing things, and so he really investigated the weight of the boat and how we could make the boat as light as possible, but put as much weight in the keel as we possibly could and go about things in that sort of way, And so it made a big difference to, I think, the way Blake ran it, but we also learnt, he's the best seaman I've ever seen. His seamanship skills are by far the best in the world, I'd say. And he taught us guys all of what we know today.
Yeah, what was your offshore experience when you headed off then? How nervous were you about it?
Well, 25 days at sea with 15 guys is not that much fun by the time you get to day 10. So there's a lot of, the place starts to stink and, you're sort of existing because you're sleeping, you're sailing, you're sleeping, you're sailing, you're sleeping, you're sailing. That's it. You're eating and whatever else you do. But the boat, we had a lot of fun on that boat. We had a great crew and we were very fortunate and saw some, we were lucky. A couple of times we were lucky we had breakages and we could have lost the race, but we managed to fix it on the fly. And so, yeah, it really was a special moment and, quite a, opportunity for us as young guys, sort of learning our trade really, to have that sort of knowledge sort of given to us by, guys like Blake. And he was very open, Peter. So we could see he never hid anything. He talked about how they raised the money and, so guys like me, my ears were wide open. I'm trying to understand how the business of yacht racing works as well. And, guys like Connor are really good at it. But Blake was good at it too.
What was he like on the boat? I guess by then he'd already been around the planet 5 times. He was seasoned. A seasoned offshore racer. What was he like on the boat? When things were tough. What kind of leader was he?
He was. He would only. He hardly ever got wound up about the way. There was probably some bad behaviour on board. There in terms of the guys, maybe we were all a bit young then and probably drinking a little bit too much rum when we were in port and stuff like that. So he had to quieten things down. But, especially the Southern Ocean, he just introduced you to how things work down there and how, safety is paramount with him. So, he was really good at that. And so, when he put his boots on, you'd be paying attention. You'd say, okay, things are a bit hairy up there or whatever. Yeah, he was very good about that and very good with weather. But he had the utmost respect from us guys until the day he died. So, it was a great tragedy, really.
Do you have any scary moments?
Plenty of scary moments. There's a lot of ice down there in the Southern Ocean, which goes away at night because you can't see it. And, the radars don't pick water up very well. So, we were sort of, in those days, there's ice. Nowadays, there's an ice limit, or there's a limit you can go to. In those days, we were bouncing off the ice pack, so we would go jibe in and then jibe back out. And, well, I think we were a bit fortunate that we never got, Cape Horn, it was blowing pretty strong, 50 to 55, 60, but the rest of it was sort of 35, 40 knots, So it was, but, it's big, they're big waves and things start to, give up because they're being used 24/7. So, we had a few hairy moments down there, that's for sure. And around the world, there's other parts of the world that are, sailing from across the Atlantic, you go right up until underneath Newfoundland there. It gets, there's a lot of hot water and cold air, and so it gets pretty misty for days, and it can get quite hairy. But yeah, there's 100 stories that some of them I was in my bunk when it was going on. So, the other watch leaders, they all had probably the same sort of, especially you'd get a fright, maybe once or twice a night down there. So you'd be paying attention, eh? Yeah.
Yeah, and big gear as well.
Big heavy gear. A lot of, the rope was just coming into its own, So wire braces were still being used a little bit. And so, it's bloody dangerous, like if a brace broke, which they sometimes did because they, got wire going through a spinnaker pole, just a beak. And, there was a lot of things that, on those boats, they were bloody heavy. And if something broke, there would be more than one thing would break because take a lot out as it went through. So it was, it was a bit dangerous, really. And
you won every leg, Brad, 6 legs around the world. Steinlager II won every single one of them. Was she that good a boat? Was Peter that good a skipper? How did that domination happen? No,
I think the boat was a reflection of, the group that put it together. Farr did a great job here because Grant Dalton had Fisher and Paykel, and that was another ketch, but they were a masthead ketch. And so Blake had he'd pushed for the fractional ketch, and Kevin Shoebridge and myself did the build with Tim Gurr, who built the boat. And so the boat was amazing. Actually we had a problem with the first boat and had to cut it up because of the laminate gluing didn't work. Anyway, they persevered and built another one, but we wound up, it was a reflection of the team, I think. But Mike Quilter did a fantastic job in navigating the boat. The first leg especially, he just picked a little corridor of breeze that we got ourselves, we had to push quite a way west to get in there, and it didn't look so good to start with, but it was there, and we wound up winning by days, so it just set us up for the race. But the boat was just faster than the others, so that's a little bit like today in the America's Cup. The fastest boat eventually will pop out. We had a lot of fun. We're probably a little bit devious and troublemaking, If you've got something it's a breakthrough, you'd rather keep it quiet. And I don't think the teams are that good at it nowadays. They're all big, egos, those guys. I'm not sure it works that well when they're all on the same boat together.
Well, back to the America's Cup. I mean, the Cup had stayed with Connor in San Diego, and so for 1992, Brad, you were involved again. How did that come about? Who was running that campaign, and how did you fit in? What was your involvement?
Actually, after 87 and the disappointment of losing to Connor in the final of the Louis Vuitton, they faded a wholesale change, and so Bruce Farr still ran the program, but actually John Clinton and David Barnes were the managers of it, and I was actually doing the around the world race, and so we were sort of out of it, and they didn't want me because I was the tactician from last time, and there's always some sort of politics that surrounds that sort of thing, And in the end, Russell Coutts was trying to sail the boat, and he was up against Rod Davis, and they picked Rod Davis, and so they asked Coutts if he'd stay and do the backup thing, and he called me and said, "Well, you come and do the last part of the deal and do the tactics for me." And so I went there with about 8 months to go, and just sailed with him, and we had a lot of fun. We were probably a little bit devious and bloody troublemaking, in terms of what we got up to, but we played a lot of golf and did a bit of sailing. But yeah, but the boat was extreme in the end. Farr just lost his mind, I think, and so the boat was way too extreme and way too fat and way too small compared to where the boats went, being thin and heavy and long and huge amounts of sail. So he was sort of heading in the wrong direction, and it sort of paid, it showed in the end that I don't think, even if we'd won the Louis Vuitton Cup, I think we would have got smashed by Bill Koch and what he'd done. Yeah. I
mean, it was a strange Challenger series, really. I mean, you were leading against Paul Cairds' Italian team, and after a dominant early display, they protested your bowsprit. I mean, what was wrong with it? What was all that about? It
was the use of the bowsprit. So they were protesting the way that the sail could be controlled by the bowsprit once the pole was away from it. So when you're jibing or whatever, and it's, it was just one of those things. We could have adopted not to use it and just use the spinnaker pole, or change the way that we went about it. But because we were sort of still making the same mistakes, which was that was a mistake, and it had an effect. But I guess it had an effect because I think they took the race off us for that. So that had an effect. But I think what was happening is that Almora was actually a better light air boat than we were, and they were just sort of coming anyway. And in the end, you could start ahead of them, but you just couldn't keep them behind you. It was a tough ask for, and then sort of Fay lost his mind and eased Davis and Barnes off, and Coutts was actually, I had to go and get him from the airport. He was off to New Zealand because he was going to do the soling Olympics, and he had to come back, and we had to sail the last two races on the back of the boat, which we hadn't done any. It was a dumb move, really. But that's what happened, and left a bad taste in everybody's mouth, I think, when you do a wholesale change at the end of a regatta, So, once again, we sort of failed. And the good part of that part is that addition was that Fay actually hired Blake to come in and spend some time with the team, and he wound up being the manager of the team, but he really wasn't managing it because Bruce Farr was, and it was too late for him to, but he sort of got enough of a feeling for it that he, even though Fay didn't want to do the next one, he sort of stepped up and managed to get the money together, made a big difference.
You talk about, your relationship with Russell Coutts. I mean, how did all that start? How come the pair of you were so tight?
I guess he was, I was sailing dinghies against him. We sailed Starlings against each other, which was the next class after P class. And then he stayed in the single-handed, and we just couldn't afford to do the Olympics, as a family, and so my father, there's no way you could. I tried to do a 470 campaign, but just we couldn't get there, and so I just stuck with the sailing. And then he wound up coming into. He wasn't match racing, but he was sailing solings and stuff like that. And he asked me to give him a bit of hand rules wise, because the match racing guys were way ahead rules wise. And then he sort of started match racing. And so we had the odd regatta against each other up here in the Stuart 34s. And then when I went to San Diego, we sort of just hit it off, because he's a pretty tenacious sort of guy, and he doesn't make mistakes twice. And, I just, he had a good following of the guys that were, the guys that we sort of got on. So there was guys like Warwick Fleury, and Murray Jones came in later, but was with us, Dean Phipps and Simon Daubney, all those guys that we were actually doing the match racing worldwide regattas together. So after that, we just got better and better. We actually got that group sort of got better and better. Every year it's got better and better and better, because he was sort of, he's very technical, and we were sort of trying to learn from these other guys, and I think we had the right mindset for all that.
A good time, I can imagine.
Yeah, we had plenty of good times, yes, and plenty of shared sports that we like playing, and we're always competitive, and there's always we had a lot of fun, and that was part of our secret, I think, is that we all enjoyed. We made it as enjoyable as possible. Yeah.
There was promise, though, right? And by 1995, the team was looking pretty solid. Black Magic, NZL 32, the fiberglass yacht to take on Connor. What was the feeling in that team as the challenge began to gather momentum?
Well, it was a small group, that group, with not much money. And so the guys that were involved in it were, doing 2 or 3 jobs in that group. And so it was, it was amazing sort of group that we wound up with, because we wound up with, I think, the best. There's a lot of very good sailors in there, and Dixon actually did a challenge out of Tutukaka where he managed to put the boat together and wound up in San Diego, and he had a good bunch of guys with him as well. But our group, I think, was very, very strong. Coots was at that stage where I think he was almost unbeatable. So he was a guy that would he just doesn't make the same mistake twice. You just don't see that in him. And he is upset with himself if he's even halfway there. So he's got high standards, and he did a fantastic job of learning and encouraging guys like Doug Peterson and Laurie Davidson to get involved with us. And Schneckenberg did a good job corralling those guys, and they came up with 2 very good boats. But we had, the Mars program was great. Murray Jones did that with Steve Wilson and Southern Spars, and the sail-making side of things was terrific, And, we just, all the factors fitted together, and we had enough experience over the years now to be very strong and see things that were coming rather than just reacting to them once they arrived.
You knew what to expect.
Well, we knew when there was something going to happen. Yes, we'd sort of worked it out, and we'd worked out that, talking ourselves down was a lot better than talking ourselves up.
What do you mean by that?
It means that we didn't give ourselves much of a chance publicly, and always made a bit of, we had a lot of propaganda going out about the speed of the boat and how we get on, and we're trying, but it's not going to be as good as what we think, and that NZL 20 was actually going just as well or better than the boats that we had, which was just way off the pace. So we'd learnt to sort of try and stay under the radar, and even when we went to, and we were a small team, so when we went to San Diego, we had the shore guys were sailing on board the boats, and we tested them and raced them. So we had, we had some, we were lucky we had a very strong team. We had some very, there was a young girl there, well, she's a woman, of course, now, but Maury Leyland, and she was in the design and technical part, and she sailed in a couple of the races with us, and she was just super handy and fitted right into that group. And so we really, I think we had something quite special.
I'm going to take you back to your comment about, I guess, managing, you call it the propaganda. I mean, it's always struck me a little bit about you, Brad, that you've actually quite enjoyed that side of the Cup. I mean, the sort of public face of it, the managing information.
I guess, yes, I guess I do enjoy that. I enjoy definitely, that part of it, because a lot of it is tongue-in-cheek. A lot of it is bullshit. And so if you can see through that, you can have a bit of fun with it. And some of them teams get quite wound up about how they're perceived and what they say, and, but it's really, I mean, self-interest in the groups is, you want to be the challenger, you want to try and win the Cup, stuff like that. So it's, that's all part and parcel of it. But I think it's less nowadays than it was then.
I mean, everyone's, professional athletes. Do you really think a bit of misinformation is going to, put them off track?
I think with yacht racing, definitely design and stuff like that. If you're better off not, if you've got something that it's a breakthrough, you'd rather keep it quiet, And I don't think the teams are that good at it nowadays with that. But I think we were very good at talking ourselves down and trying to keep everybody working away and keeping everything that we knew inside, and trying to glean as much as we could from the other teams about what they thought was quick and what they thought was slow and how they sailed their boats and stuff like that. I think we were good at that. Even now with Emirates Team New Zealand, we call it's like a fortress compared to the other teams. I mean, is that your fault? Did you start all that? Actually, we had, well, probably, because for the defence of the Cup in 2000, we had a fortress mentality, which was different to 95, because we were on our own by then. So there's a big difference between being the defender and a challenger. I think the challengers have lost their way a bit in terms of they should be more together through the Challenger series, and they should be trying to find the fastest challenger and the best challenger. Look, we all know we want to be that one, but if you're not going to be the best of that group, why hinder it, Because it's even like this time, I think that probably the New York Yacht Club boat was the fastest of the three boats, but it wound up not making it, And probably Ben was the slowest of the three boats, and he wound up winning the round robins, and he just sort of got exposed and couldn't quite catch up with that speed at the end. But in the days of these other slower boats, little things are a big deal, and I think just being able to hide that is a good thing. So fortress mentality, I think, works as a defender, but I'm not so sure it's a good idea as a challenger. Let's go back to San Diego in 95. I mean, what was it like as that all went down, taking on the might of Dennis Conner? Actually, he looked a little bit in disarray, So I think that they were running on fumes a bit, Stars and Stripes, and Coke had done a good job with the women's effort they had a great boat. They some pretty good sailors there. JJ's pretty good. Leslie Ignot, they almost won that. They just forgot they didn't have to jibe down the last run. Otherwise, they would have probably made it to the Cup. And then you had Kostecki and the group that he was in with Young America. So they had, in the end, Dennis realised he sort of probably was the slowest boat, wound up winning the Defender Series, and then he had to come up against us guys. And so he changed boats. And he just looked in disarray, really, because he had Kayard steering the boat, and they're all big egos, those guys. So I'm not sure it works that well when they're all on the same boat together.
Too many egos in one place. What happens then?
Well, there's just an explosion, isn't there, at some stage?
You obviously won the Cup and all came back to Auckland with it. I mean, can you remember that day? What was that like, taking the Cup out of the States for only the second time, but also bringing it back to this sailing mad nation here?
You sort of had to pinch yourself a little bit. It was quite different. And it was a big opportunity for us guys, because we'd managed to do something probably that we didn't really. I'm not so sure the group really thought they were going to win the America's Cup when we went to San Diego. Thought we'd have a chance at it. The Aussie team was pretty strong, but not really 100% sure. And actually, in '95, Blake, he ran up against a bit of a problem with the sponsors, because he sort of ran out of money. We ran out of money, and he had to go to them and ask for a bit more to actually make it into the Cup. We had to buy new sails, and he did a fantastic job there, really. And so when it came back to New Zealand, he had to square that away with the sponsors in terms of the ownership of the team and how it worked and whatever. And he defended that the way, the ethos of how it was set up and the way it was working and stuff like that. But also there was mistakes made there, where everybody just disappears. That's the problem with the America's Cup, is you might win it and there's a bit of a party and everybody disappears because there's no real budget to hold on to people. It's not like a big company, unless you've got a wealthy individual backing you that he can sort of tip some money in straight away to secure key people. They all drift away. So everybody went off, and there was very little information that came out. But Blake was working away here trying to sort it out. I think it was like a 5-year, I think it was 95, but the next Cup was in 2000. So it was a long time between drinks, especially for the sailors like us guys. Yeah. So we went off and did match racing and other things, but it started something that never really got fixed.
What do you mean by that?
It just started a difference between, the administration of the team and the sailing side of the team that never really got fixed. And so when Blake decided to leave, Coots and I tried to take the control of the team over, but it was managed by a trustees, and so they really, I think they liked me, but I'm not sure they liked Coots. Anyway, it didn't work out.
You would say that. We'll get to all that in a moment. But, winning the Cup and bringing it back here, how life-changing was that for Brad Butterworth? Oh, it was huge. Huge for us. Huge for me, huge for my family, huge for everything. Just changed everything, because it's, you've won the America's Cup. You're solidly professional sailor. You can, you're getting courted to do other things and go to other teams or sail professionally. And so I was sailing professionally. So I, was in 2-ton cups and 1-ton cups, and, the Admirals Cup had stopped by then, but we were, there was other big regattas everywhere, and the match racing side of it took over because we wanted to keep developing our match race skills. And so we were hard into that. And sailing little boats in Europe a lot of the time. And so, yeah, and you're making, not a huge amount of money, but you're making a good living out of it. And it sort of, it enabled us guys to, put a deposit on a house and do those things that you needed to do because you're growing up, You got to do something like that, or else life passes you by. I hope you're all enjoying the Butterworth experience. I could listen to him all day. We're going to leave Brad there for this part and pick up in part 2, where we kick things off with Brad's intense account of sailing the 1998 Sydney Hobart, before hearing his fascinating tales of winning the America's Cup in New Zealand for the home team, and then, of course, for a rival. It's gripping stuff. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and would like to support the podcast, then please do head over to buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast. We work hard to bring you a real quality listen, and it's lovely to have your support. Thanks as always to the talented Tim at Vertigo Films. Thanks for your attention to detail. We all love you for it. As we said earlier, Tim has also shot and crafted a series of mini films about my double-handed offshore summer with Henry Bombay, pushing hard for a result in this year's Fastnet. If you want to check them out, part 1 and 2 are on the podcast YouTube channel. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and have fun on the water, and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here.
Oh, that's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there. Gaining on the lane line there.
Looking at 10.5 and 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah. Copy.
This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.